Apple's first foldable phone is finally coming, probably by the end of this year, or with their recent production issues, early 2027 at the latest. And based on the latest leaks and mockups, I actually 3D printed my own model. This is my very first time 3D printing something, so it doesn't look great, and of course the final release is going to look a lot different in terms of everything, but in terms of the dimensions and size, this is probably going to be pretty close to the real thing. Now, actually getting my hands on this and thinking more about what we know about the iPhone Fold, or apparently the iPhone Ultra now, I have a ton of thoughts. And since I am cautiously excited, I wanted to talk about my biggest hopes and worries about this upcoming thing. Okay, first of all, the thing I'm most excited for with the iPhone Fold is the rumored aspect ratio for the inner display. On Samsung's Fold and even on other Chinese foldables, the inner display has a ton of letterboxing when watching videos. This square-like screen on the Fold 7 is great for reading articles and multitasking, but for watching videos, you end up with these massive black bars at the top and bottom, and the viewing area is basically the same as a Landscape S26 Ultra. So it just feels like you're wasting a ton of space that you could have. Apple's Foldable will be more of a 4:3 screen, which is very similar to an iPad mini, at least in terms of the aspect ratio, so this is way better for landscape video content, which is perfect for when I'm watching YouTube or Netflix on the train or bus. You also have to consider how Apple always uses some of the highest quality panels from display manufacturers like Samsung and LG, which ironically are even better than the ones being used on Samsung's own flagships. Plus, with Apple's excellent display tuning, the quality of the inner display might be one of the best we've seen on a foldable, including the idea that the crease here might be close to unnoticeable thanks to them using some of the latest crease innovations in the industry. And just based off Apple's track record, I am cautiously optimistic about the iPhone Fold speakers. If you used a foldable before, you know the speakers are never that great. They're a bit tinny or leaning onto one side or the other because of the form factor and the physical limitations, but Apple does have a track record of really great audio tuning on almost all their phones, so I'm kind of hoping for a miracle with their foldable. If it's anything better than other foldables and something remotely close to iPad speakers, then I'll be very satisfied. I'm also pretty happy that Touch ID is making a comeback. Because of the physical limitations of this form factor, Apple is reportedly ditching their usual Face ID sensors on their first foldable and going with their fingerprint sensor instead on the side power button. This might be controversial since Face ID is known to be more secure and it's very popular to a lot of people, but personally I've always had more trouble dealing with Face ID anyway. It's just more convenient and faster for me to use Touch ID on a daily basis, especially when it's something like a phone I'm constantly pulling in and out of my pocket since I don't even have to look at it to get it to unlock. And one more thing I am really looking forward to with Apple coming out with their own foldable is that third-party cases and accessories for foldables is probably going to get a lot better. I love my Z Fold 7, but the case options are just not that great. They're either not protective enough or too protective and bulky. There's only a few that I actually like and would pay for. With Apple coming out with their own foldables, I'm hoping the variety of cases and accessories for foldables out there will improve for the entire category. So that's all the stuff I'm pretty optimistic about, but based on all we know and all the reports we've been hearing, there's a little more things that I am worried about. The first thing I noticed when holding this is how wide it is when folded. The cover display is diagonal 5.4 or 5.5 inches. It doesn't sound too big, but when it's folded like this, it's going to be about 85mm wide. For comparison, the Fold 7 is only about 73mm wide. Samsung's approach here makes the phone feel like a normal, maybe a slightly narrower normal phone. This wide iPhone Fold design reminds me a lot of the Surface Duo. I do have a soft spot for the Duo, but when using it one-handed when folded, it wasn't a great experience. I was always stretching for everything and I just didn't really want to use it one-handed ever. If Apple also goes this wide, you're going to have to use this with two hands most of the time. It's not as wide as a Duo, but it's enough to probably not be the most comfortable for typing with one hand while walking or doing something else. Apple's Fold is also reported to be about 230 to 250 grams, somewhere in between there, and it'll be about 9.5mm thick when folded. Samsung finally hit that sweet spot with the Fold 7 at only 8.9mm thick and 215 grams. It really just feels like a regular phone, and that became a difference maker for me. So if iPhone Fold weighs at least 20 grams heavier while also being thicker while also being so wide, I'm not sure if I'll have much of a wow factor as I did when I got my Fold 7. So I'm hoping those rumors aren't totally true and we get something more similar to the weight and thinness of the Fold 7. I am also pretty bummed that this thing will only come with a dual camera setup with just a main camera and an ultra wide like the base iPhone. So no telephoto, no optical zoom, and the main sensor is probably just going to be the same one as from the base iPhone 17 or the upcoming 18 instead of the one from the Pro. This makes sense since they're working with limited space and they're trying to keep things as thin as possible. I know Samsung also doesn't put their highest end camera hardware onto their Fold series, but I was hoping Apple changes their paradigm for their most expensive phone ever. Personally, if I'm paying for Apple's most expensive phone, phone, I want their best cameras. A consolation prize would be if they offered to keep Pro RAW available as a feature for this phone, but I'm not sure how likely that's going to be. And on that note, I'm not sure what to expect for the software experience. I think for running single apps it's going to be completely fine, but it's the multitasking that I'm kind of worried about. That mostly comes from my very average experience multitasking on the iPad mini. If you use an iPad mini with iPadOS 26, you know that multitasking is not its strongest feature. A lot of the UI elements are tiny when you're doing windowed multitasking. There honestly aren't a ton of quick multitasking gestures or shortcuts, and besides the dock, there aren't any quick shortcuts to access certain apps. It is easy to use if you take your time, and I do like how Apple tries to give you more options than before, but in general, it just feels slower than it can be. On a Samsung Foldable with One UI, you have so many options like 3-finger swipe for split screen, edge panel for a ton of app shortcuts, pop-up view by default, and you just have a ton of flexibility here in general. For Apple's upcoming Foldable, the software experience will probably be something close to the iPadOS experience, but it won't run iPad apps, mostly just iPhone apps. And considering the relatively small screen real estate here, I have a feeling Apple will only let you do side-by-side split screen multitasking with maybe something like slide over. But if the shortcuts and the gestures are anything like iPadOS, I feel like multitasking won't be the primary focus here. So far, it seems like the biggest benefit will be about having that big screen with more convenient UI elements that gives you more in a single view. I am also a bit worried about how Apple is going to treat the difference between the home screen layouts of the inner and the cover screens. iPadOS has this weird habit of shifting your icons and widgets whenever you change orientation, since they have slightly different grids, so you sort of need a different setup for each orientation. I am hoping I don't have to do that for the iPhone Fold. By the way, if you like the ASMR this screen protector has been giving throughout this video, this is the Paperlike 3, the sponsor for this portion of the video. I've been using an Apple Pencil with an iPad mini for a while now. If you're anything like me and you like to write your handwritten notes down, then you know that writing on bare glass just sucks. It's slippery, not accurate, it just doesn't feel like you're actually writing. So that's why the Paperlike 3 is basically essential if you use an Apple Pencil at all. It uses the nanodot surface technology, which is basically this unique micro texture they've perfected over the years. This tech gives you that exact tactile resistance you get from a real pen on paper. It really does make a big difference in how your handwriting actually looks, because you finally have that friction and control like you're writing on paper, and you can even hear it yourself. But one of the main things that makes it really easy for me to buy one of these is the installation process. Their new Butterfly application system is really easy and designed to be as stress-free and dust-free as possible. It keeps the iPad screen sealed until the very last second, so you get a perfect alignment with zero bubbles right on the first try. And just as a spare, Paperlike provides 2 screen protectors in every pack, so you don't need to worry about it too much when setting it up. If you also want to fix that glass-on-glass feeling and actually enjoy taking notes on your iPad, use my link below and go check out the Paperlike 3 screen protectors. So yeah, those are all my deepest and darkest thoughts about the iPhone Fold and everything we know about it so far. The starting price is rumored to be about $2,000 to $2,400 and scale up depending on the storage, which isn't too surprising. I mean, even the Fold 7 is basically $2,000 already, so Apple being a bit more expensive would make sense and would be reasonable, even though that's still crazy expensive. Alright, so that's everything we know about Apple's first foldable and my biggest hopes and worries about it. Let me know down in the comments what your biggest hopes and worries are about this phone. If you are interested in more content about the iPhone Fold once it comes, this channel will be there, so make sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next video.